The creation of the Comic Code Authority marked a decisive shift in comics history, draining much of the economic vitality and creative energy from the industry overall. Nevertheless, the code's curtailment of the creative possibilities inherent in the comics field paradoxically resulted in three tremendously creative responses. The first of these is the rebirth of the superhero in 1956, which inaugurated the period now known as the Silver Age. It is my contention that the Silver Age was not simply a relaunch of the same heroes in new and gaudier costumes, though that it was, as a reintroduction of the genre that cast new terms between the superhero and the reader. In effect, the Silver Age wrote the reader into the superhero story, so that the true secret identity of each and every one of its heroes was in fact the reader, him or herself. The Silver Age properly begins with a Golden Age hero, the Flash, who was created in 1940 by Gardner Fox and Harry Lampert. In 1956, DC publisher Irwin Donenfeld tasked Julius Schwartz, the Flash's original editor, to reintroduce the hero. Superheroes were in a lull, and DC needed a new direction to appeal to the critical 8 to 12-year-old audience. Schwartz turned to Carmine Infantino and Joe Kubert to cast a new character, and so, in Showcase number 4, the Flash was reborn. The cover of this comic is worth pausing over because it shows us the stakes at play. In the top right-hand corner is the approval of the Comics Code Authority. Coming down diagonally from that seal is the Flash. First his name, and then the new Flash in his bright red unitard with yellow details. In the left-hand corner, we see details and an entry blank for a prize contest are contained in the issue. DC is still playing by the same rules, the rules of the virulent art. But what occupies the cover overall is the arrangement of panels. For instead of the traditional 3x3 grid of the comic books, the panels are laid out following a movie film strip. It is as if to say that the Flash competes not with rival comics publishers and different heroes, so much with an entirely different medium, film. If we open the comic book, on the first page, our eyes are drawn to the last panel. While in the police laboratory, scientist Barry Allen chuckles over an old magazine. What a character Flash was, battling crime and injustice everywhere. And what a unique weapon he had against the arsenal of crime. Speed. Supersonic speed. Undreamed of speed. The panel sets a stage for reading. In it, the unsuspecting Flash, Barry Allen, the man who will be turned into the Flash, actually reads a Flash comic. He reads it, too, at a time of repose, his lunch, and he drinks from a carton of milk with a straw. The panel writes metafiction. It tells us how we are to read, and it tells us the stakes of our reading. It tells us, too, that the Flash's power, the power of that reading, is not some technological force, not some weaponry, gimmickry. It is speed. It is the speed of the imagination, a speed faster than any arsenal, faster than film itself. And overall, too, it tells us that the experience of reading is wholesome, clean-cut. And I find in this an analogy for DC's entry into the Silver Age. For DC relaunches The Flash as a clean-cut activity that one can identify with. This defines DC's stable of heroes. However, other publishers were also looking for a way to continue in the post-Cold world. And one of these was Timely. Timely Publications was founded in 1933 by Martin Goodman. In 1939, Timely released Marvel Comics with the Human Torch on the cover, an android burning his way through a wall, shot at, but the bullet melting before it reaches his chest. Marvel Comics also featured Namor, the Submariner, and here he fights this crew of a U-boat. We know Timely, too, from Captain America. Captain America was created by Simon and Kirby, But Simon and Kirby were comics packagers. Like Will Eisner, they provided content to other comics publishers, and they sold Captain America to Timely Comics. By issue 10, Martin Goodman had had enough of Simon and Kirby, and so he separated ways with them but kept Captain America, inviting Stanley Lieber, now known as Stan Lee, Goodman's wife's cousin, to write the script. Timely, too, was looking for a relaunch, and in 1951, they changed their name to Atlas Comics, and in 1953 attempted to relaunch all of Timely's old heroes in one issue called Young Men Comics. Here, the Human Torch, Submariner, and Captain America all appear, but not with great success. By 1958, Atlas was not doing well. In 1961, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby launched the Fantastic Four and recast Timely Comics and Atlas Comics as Marvel Comics. This process was hesitant and halting, and I'd like to talk on it for a few moments, but before we get into it, I want to suggest a new term for analysis: allegory. Allegory comes from the Greek, and it literally means other speaking. Now, other speaking is an interesting term, because on the one hand, allegory is simply a model for interpretation. It means that each text contains other speaking, another voice. And so we can say that every story we tell has a literal level, the literal characters and actions that make up the narrative. What allegory suggests is that there is another speaking going on. There is a figurative level as well. That whatever happens on that literal level, there is some other level, a level in which meanings are different. So allegory tells us that each story, each allegorical story, is about something else. But in that notion of another voice, it suggests that each story is about an other within us. The true strength of allegory, I would argue, is that as we read, we recreate another voice within our own head. Our voice takes on another voice. Allegory is a complicated mode, but at a basic level, it suggests that stories enter into us, both in that we interpret them and come with another speaking, and that they place the other inside us. And so Fantastic Four emerges in 1961, and in many ways we see the tried and true nature of the horror comic. There is a grotesque monster bursting through, and there is a strange crew of assembled characters fighting this monster. Some of them look like monsters themselves, the Thing in the foreground. The Fantastic Four also enters into the publishing world in an odd way. It carries the seal of approval, and under that, an almost demure MC, indicating Marvel Comics. I would suggest that the Fantastic Four is, for all its hackneyed and derivative nature as a horror comic and a superhero comic, also an allegory. It is an allegory essentially for a family of misfits, attempting to get along, but nevertheless divided by their very identities. One is like water, Mr. Fantastic, who can fill any container. Another is like earth, the Thing, who is strong and rock-like. Fire, the Human Torch, reborn, not as an android, but as a young man, fiery in temper. And finally, air, the Invisible Girl. The family is made up of the elements. They are fragmented, but they have to join together. And in that first issue, they literally strive to achieve some sense of unity. Hesitant, the Thing won't put his hand in until the final panel there. Spider-Man 2 is an allegory, I would suggest. Here we see Jack Kirby's cover for Amazing Fantasy 15, which introduced the Spider-Man. But when you open that book, you see the first thing it is not so much a superhero story as a high school story. For Spider-Man, at heart, is a story of adolescence. It is a story of the body changing, becoming stronger and stickier, becoming different than what it was. It is a story of the awkwardness of what that change is. And we see, too, that though Spider-Man was an original creation, the comic book format remains the same. Here is an ad, learn to draw, even if you can't draw. You turn the page, you get through this first Spider-Man story, we see young Peter Parker weeping over the loss of Uncle Ben, realizing his own fallibility, and our eyes shift to the next pages. Boys, men, my secret new Dynaflex method can build you a magnificent new He-Man muscled body. And as we continue, we see that the Spider-Man story is over. Instead, now we get The Bell Ringer, also written by Stan Lee and drawn by Steve Ditko, who drew the wonderful first appearance of Spider-Man and drew Spider-Man throughout his early career. Steve Ditko here is drawing The Bell Ringer, a scary kind of gothic American story. And if we turn through The Bell Ringer, we see there are Martians among us, also Lee and Ditko. And you can see, too, if you look on the right-hand page, in the second tier, second panel, does not that look, in many ways, like Peter Parker reading at school or on the radio with Uncle Ben next to him? If we move on through the comic, we see Mummy Man, Man in the Case, and so forth. My point here is that Marvel's initial foray into the rebirth of comics, superhero comics in the Silver Age, was not clear-cut and straightforward. Instead, it was an evolving practice that initially relaunched the heroes and the brand tentatively in Amazing Fantasy. But each story, here is the X-Men in 1963, each story had an allegorical dimension. The characters were not so much clean-cut as identifiable. If the Fantastic Four is a family and if Spider-Man is an adolescent, the X-Men is a school also of misfits, of exiles, banded together to work together. We see, by 1963 here, the Marvel Comics has changed from a mere MC to a masthead, a brand up in the left-hand corner. And so it goes. We get the Avengers in 1963 as well, a corporate group of different egos, each battling as much themselves as their putative enemies. Let me read to you the title page of Avengers 4. Captain America joins the Avengers, a tale destined to become a magnificent milestone in the Marvel Age of comics, bringing you the great superhero which your wonderful avalanche of fan mail demanded. Step forward, Captain America. Your rightful place is here, among the Avengers. The mighty Marvel Comics group is proud to announce that Jack Kirby drew the original Captain America during the Golden Age of comics, and now he draws it again. Also, Stan Lee's first script during those fabled days was Captain America, and now he authors it again. Thus, the Chronicle of Comicdom turns full circle, reaching a new pinnacle of greatness. Editor's note: we sincerely suggest you save this issue. We feel you will treasure it in time to come. Gloriously written by Stan Lee, grandly illustrated by Jack Kirby, gallantly lettered by Art Simic. Where does the fiction end here? The action of the page inaugurates Captain America into the team known as the Avengers, and Thor formally welcomes him in. But that same notion of inauguration is coloring the prose of the editor as well. For the reader now is both inaugurating Captain America into the Marvel Universe, and the Marvel Universe is inaugurating the reader into comics history. The reader is invited to recognize that Lee and Kirby were both part of the Golden Age, that Captain America, too, was a founding hero of the Golden Age. Editorial comment, superhero action are woven together, and the reader is part of the experience. Stan Lee's voice works hard to create this synthesis. Indeed, Stan Lee creates a lot on this page that is greater than simply the superhero action. For on the one hand, he creates his own voice, a voice which speaks to you. On the other hand, he creates what is now known as the Marvel Bullpen. The Marvel Bullpen is a fantasy of creative endeavor. It is a group in which Lee and Kirby work together happily, in which Lee gloriously writes, Kirby grandly illustrates, and Simic gallantly letters. They work together happily to produce these comics, and the reader too is part of it. The reader can treasure the comic. Indeed, not bad advice considering the value that this comic has achieved. The reader is removed from the Marvel bullpen, which exists elsewhere, in a room in which all these creative juices flow together, but the reader is related to it. In a similar way, Stan Lee creates what is known as the Marvel Method. Together they make the comic, and that Marvel Method ensures an overall quality of Marvel Comics. This is furthered by Stan's soapbox, which occurs within the comics, where Stan Lee comments to the reader, and the reader can write in. It's furthered still in that it's not just about the Avengers at all. It's about all Marvel Comics. Indeed, it's about the Marvel Universe, which freely moves from comic to comic in crossovers. Here, in the first issue of The Amazing Spider-Man, Spider-Man encounters the Fantastic Four. The universe is coherent. It moves between the Fantastic Four, the X-Men, the Avengers. Indeed, the reader is encouraged to follow along in this coherence. Thus, I argue that the allegory of Marvel Comics is not simply reaching out to the reader through the experiences of the heroes which echo the reader's experience, him or herself. Each reader wrestles with the problem of family. Each reader wrestles with the problem of adolescence. Each reader wrestles with the problem of being one ego in a group of egos. But each reader, too, is folded into the very comic book process of creation and of reception that are all rolled into one. Thus, I suggest that the other speaking within Marvel Comics is not simply the voice of the hero, is not simply the voice of the reader, but takes on a third party within the reader himself or herself. There are two codas to Marvel's entry into the Silver Age. The first, that in 1968, Marvel was sold to a film company, Perfect Film. And thus, if The Flash introduced the Silver Age in competition with film, and if Marvel perfects the Silver Age through its complicated allegory, in a strange way, film wins the Silver Age by buying out Marvel. A second point concerns the Comics Code Authority. In 1971, the President of the United States, in an effort to combat drugs, asked Marvel to produce a story which spoke out against drug use. And so, Stan Lee, Gil Kane, and John Romita Sr. wrote Green Goblin Reborn. It took a few issues to play out the plot, but in it, drugs are featured as an enemy that even Spider-Man has trouble defeating. Drugs are a horrible enemy. The Comics Code Authority, seeing drugs featured in the comic, withheld their seal of approval. Lee went ahead, published the story. The 3 issues didn't bear the seal, but they nevertheless sold well. After all, the presidential authority trumps the Comic Code Authority. Thus, even authorized by the United States government, art falls out of purity, falls out of censorship. The fact of the matter is, art is synthetic. It draws on many different parts and many different people.